The plane uncle's boarding with some woman looks like a disaster waiting to happen. He really shouldn't go on that flight. Little Emily's sudden outburst caught both my husband and me off guard, prompting a surprised "ha" from both of us. Especially me, I was doubly shocked. A plane ride with another woman? I thought it was just a business trip. Why does he need to fly with a woman? The reason quickly became clear, unforgivable. To think he'd betray me and plan a romantic getaway, despite the warnings of better not get on that plane. Despite everything, John, my husband, still went off to the airport, so I decided to take matters into my own hands and start my own revenge drama. I'm Susan Harris, a 30-something housewife, living with John, my husband. Though we both work, our house is often empty. Weekends are usually spent chilling at home, but lately, John's behavior has been odd. He's been coming home much later than usual, even on weekends, citing work as the reason. The frequency of his business trips, leaving the house deserted for days, has spiked. I'd be lying if I said I didn't find John's behavior suspicious, but I haven't found concrete proof. Plus, I was afraid to confront him and rock the boat. So, like every other day, I choose to ignore John's selfish actions, somehow keeping our marriage intact. Then one day, a little visitor came to our house. It was Emily, my brother and his wife's daughter. To me, she's my niece. My brother and his wife live close by, and we often dine together and go shopping, interacting in various ways. I've watched over Emily since she was a baby, and I often visit my brother's house to play with her. So Emily has grown quite fond of me. On a day when my brother and his wife absolutely couldn't die having the day off, agreed to have Emily over and look after her for the day. "Auntie, let's play. Emily wants to play with dolls," she said with a smile as bright as a blooming flower. As soon as she saw me begging to play, I was completely smitten with Emily. "Okay, please take good care of her today," my brother said. "Count on me. I'll call if anything comes up." When I said that, my brother smiled as if relieved. Then I brought Emily home, and we spent a fulfilling day playing with dolls and baking cookies with the ingredients I had prepared. In the midst of this, I heard the door open. "Keep it down, will you? It's my day off and you woke me up," grumbled John as he came out of his room. He didn't seem to notice Emily was there and glared at me before letting out a big sigh. Generally, if you know your husband is resting at home, wouldn't you try to keep it down and let him rest peacefully? Can't you even be considerate of such trivial things? You're really failing as a wife, he snapped. "I'm sorry for the noise, but I did tell you beforehand that Emily was coming over today, didn't I? I even mentioned it might get a bit loud." "Don't give me that excuse," John shouted back when I tried to reason with him. Surprised by his loud voice, I realized Emily, who was baking with me, looked like she was about to cry, so I quickly focused on getting John out of there. Even as John hurled terrible words at me, all I could say was, "I'm sorry." I didn't want to provoke John any further and scare Emily. Eventually, John seemed satisfied and said, "I'm going to wash my face," disappearing into the washroom. Relieved, I turned to Emily and apologized, and she bravely shook her head, saying, "It's okay." "Uncle looks like he's going to fall," Emily suddenly said after John went to the washroom. Again, I asked, and she nodded. Emily has always said strange things, almost like she can see into the future, especially about people she's close to or sees often. At first, I thought it was just a child's play and responded casually with, "Is that so?" However, after experiencing several instances where things happened exactly as Emily had said, I came to accept that this child must indeed be seeing something extraordinary. So without doubting her words, I just nodded and carried on. A few minutes later, I heard a loud noise from the washroom followed by John's angry voice. Ouch. Once again, it happened just as Emily said it would. John came back from the washroom, his face red, and started hurling more terrible words at me. "You could have at least cleaned the bathroom properly. Because of you, I slipped and fell." Even though I knew I wasn't the type to neglect cleaning and that the bathroom was always spotless, John's claim was clearly due to his own carelessness. It was unbearable how he was pinning it on me. "I always keep it clean. Don't blame me for your own carelessness, okay? Don't talk back to me. It's your fault, so apologize properly." His words were so unreasonable that I was utterly astounded. Despite it all being his own doing, he was pushing the blame on me, making me apologize just to vent his frustrations. I sighed at John, who was like a small child, unable to even control his own emotions. At the beginning of our marriage, John wasn't this selfish. He was rather a person who seemed to care about others. But as time went by, John began to show his true colors. He really didn't seem to care about anyone else at all. Just 1 month into our marriage, I found myself living as John's maid. I basically couldn't talk back to John, and even if I was made to do something I didn't want to, I couldn't complain. That was the rule imposed on me. If asked whether I wasn't angry about it, honestly, I doubt I could nod in agreement. However, I dreaded making waves in our marriage and complicating our life together even more. About a week had passed since the day Emily came to our house when news of John's next business trip came in. This was his 3rd trip this month, and this time he was not going to be back for about a week. On the day he was to leave, as I was helping him pack, my phone rang. Who could it be? It was from my brother's phone. Thinking something might be wrong, I excused myself from John and answered the call, only to find Emily on the line. She probably borrowed my brother's phone. Emily sounded panicked on the other end. I told her to calm down and listen to what she had to say, and then she dropped a bombshell. "Uncle's plane, the one with a lady on it, it's going to catch fire. He really shouldn't get on that plane." I was shocked for 2 reasons. Emily's words about the plane catching fire and the fact that John was boarding a plane with a woman despite being on a business trip. It was unthinkable for him to be on a plane with a woman on a business trip. What on earth was going on? It was getting me nowhere just thinking about it, so I told John that Emily had called and said, if possible, it's best not to get on the plane. But John brushed it off. "I ain't got no obligation to play along with a kid's game. Today's trip is set. No way I'm not going." And he left the house. He would surely head straight to the airport. Emily's predictions had never been wrong before. It's likely not going to be any different this time, and John will probably meet a terrible fate. As his wife, I probably should tell him to turn back immediately, but more than that, I was concerned about why he was getting on a plane with another woman. I couldn't help but feel like I needed to uncover the reason behind why such a situation had occurred. So I decided not to stop John forcibly and just watch how things would unfold, so I could be ready to start my own vengeance if need be. Sometime later, while I was relaxing at home, the word "breaking news" flashed on the television that I had left on. Curious, I saw that a plane that had just left Japan had crashed. I had a bad feeling, and upon checking, sure enough, it was the plane John was on. The TV showed images of the plane on fire, perhaps ignited by gasoline. Was this what Emily was talking about? Just as I was starting to make sense of it all, I received a call from the rescue team. John had been rushed to the hospital and was in a touch-and-go situation. They also asked about a woman who was with John, apparently in her 20s and worked nights, who had unfortunately died immediately after the accident. The rescue worker had tried to contact her relatives but couldn't reach anyone, and as a last resort asked me. Regrettably, I had no information about her and had to confess as much. After thanking me for my cooperation, the rescue worker hung up. Life-saving efforts were likely still ongoing. I couldn't help but feel sorry for those involved in the accident. John ended up in the ICU because his condition was critical. Visits were restricted until he stabilized, even for family members. Instead of getting upset, I found myself focused on other things I needed to do, so it actually worked out for me. I made sure to inform both of our families about John's accident. My in-laws were particularly shocked, and hearing my mother-in-law cry over the phone truly saddened me. But my thirst for revenge is far from satisfied. I won't rest until I've put him through so much agony that he regrets holding on to life. I could never forgive John for treating me like nothing more than a maid while he gallivanted about and engaged in affairs. A few days later, I got a call from the hospital. Apparently, John had regained consciousness. His condition was gradually improving, and soon he was moved to a general ward. So I steeled myself to visit him. When I mentioned John's name at the hospital, the nurse looked at me with pity and said, "Ah, the one from that accident." I've been frequently checking the news, and it seems that the crash was one of the worst in history, with many lives lost. Among them, I sensed an extraordinary will to live in John, who had miraculously survived. Led by the nurse to his room, I found John asleep, connected to many IV drips. The nurse told me that he was working hard at physical therapy every day, and after it ends, he'd sleep like a log. Since John's doctor was free at the moment, we decided to talk while John was asleep, and I got a detailed explanation about his condition. The doctor said that John suffered severe burns all over his body in the accident, and the impact of the crash also damaged his spine, causing him to lose sensation in his lower body. No matter what treatments are tried, the sensation in his lower body will likely never return. He can no longer walk or even stand, let alone go to the bathroom by himself. Of course, from now on, he'll be forced to live in a wheelchair, and he's currently undergoing rehab to learn how to manage daily life on his own. When John learned that he would never regain sensation in his lower body, he looked utterly hopeless about the future ahead. I had never seen John seriously commit to anything, whether it was his work, relationships, or with me. Hearing that John was diligently doing his rehab, I wondered if there had been some mistake. But John has a high pride, and he probably couldn't accept a life dependent on others, not from me. From now on, he's going to have to live with disabilities, and no matter how hard he tries, he won't have any choice but to rely on others. Yet, despite understanding that, he stubbornly refuses to depend on me, which almost made me smirk. The doctor provided me with materials on how to renovate the house for wheelchair access or move to a barrier-free home, and how to better deal with John's disabilities in the future. The more I read the materials, the more I realized the gravity of John's condition, and I suddenly felt a bit sorry for him. But this predicament is the result of his own doing. If only he had listened to Emily's words and canceled that affair trip, all of this could have been avoided. It wasn't even work-related. He should have prioritized his own life. That would have probably saved the life of his affair partner as well. Due to John's poor judgment, one life was lost, and now he has to live bearing a heavy burden. I've truly realized how important it is to trust and accept others' words. I've always trusted Emily and her advice, and I'm so glad I did. I'm thinking of sending Emily a thank you message later. When John groaned and woke up, "Susan, is that you? Susan, you came." Seeing me, John looked relieved and continued to speak. "I've been lonely since you haven't visited for a while. Thanks for coming. I can't offer you anything, but make yourself at home." This was a completely different attitude from the John who used to belittle me and treat me like a maid. I wondered if the accident caused him to lose his memory, but the next words out of his mouth brought me back to reality. "Did the doc fill you in?" "My lower half, it's not going to move anymore. This hospital life, it's like being in hell. I hate the idea of having a stranger take care of my personal needs. I prefer you 100 times over. I just want to be discharged and go home." John's pride was evident. He couldn't stand being cared for by the nurses, even though the nurses were just doing their job for him. I thought it incredibly ignorant to speak like that, and John continued with his selfish remarks. I know I've become like this, but being with you makes me want to keep on living. So let's continue to support each other as husband and wife, okay? Continue to support each other? If my memory serves me right, we've never supported each other as a couple, not even once. Sean always left the household to me and went out to play. I turned a blind eye because he was tired from work, but if he's been cheating, that's a whole different story. Cheating is outright betrayal. The more I talk to John, the angrier I get. I'm overwhelmed by the feeling that I must not forgive this man, and my instincts scream to bring him down completely so he can never be so presumptuous again. Unaware of this, John suggests, maybe we should just move, or living with my parents might not be a bad idea, as if he hasn't woken from his dream. That's why I decided to make him face reality first. Sorry, but I have no intention whatsoever of taking care of you. At my words, John's eyes widen in shock. Then, with a trembling voice full of disbelief, he scrambles for words. Don't make such a cruel joke, please. I genuinely believe that you would accept me, help me out. But to hear such a joke, it really hurts. It's not a joke at all. I'm serious. Let's get a divorce. I can't stand the thought of continuing as your wife after the way you behaved, not to mention the cheating, and I certainly won't be taking care of you. When I make myself clear, John seems to finally understand how I feel, and he starts to babble in panic. But that's just too much, isn't it? As you can see, I've become paralyzed from the waist down. I can't live on my own. I need you. Please don't abandon me. You're all I have. Tears well up in John's eyes. He must be serious about trying to hold on to me. Never before has John tried to face me this honestly. Even when I tried to confront the issues, he would brush me off, saying it's too troublesome, and wouldn't even engage in a proper discussion, which is essential for a married couple. But now he's suddenly saying he wants to talk, seemingly in an attempt to protect himself. But it's not for my sake or because he wants us to work as a couple. It's just John being selfish, wanting me to remain as his maid to make his life easier going forward. I have no obligation to indulge such selfishness, and there's nothing in it for me. Would the old me who loved John with all her heart, no matter how problematic his behavior, have listened to his words and agonized over them? Maybe. If I accept John now, even if we can't support each other, we might have a different kind of marriage, a bit closer to what it should be. John has a high self-esteem and can't bear to rely on others, so even in this state, he'd probably find work and try to support himself. If there's a chance to start over, it would be now. Such an opportunity won't come again. If I abandon John here, that's the end of our relationship. We'll never go back to being a couple, and he'll lose his support in me, likely facing hardship. If I leave John now, I might be dooming him to a life of wandering lost and alone. It's a significant decision as a person and as John's wife. But I've already decided not to go back because the love has cooled and the trust in John is gone. Sure, if I accept him now, we might talk seriously for a while and lead a life more like a married couple, but I've grown tired from being treated like John's servant for so long. I can't bear the thought of striving for his sake any longer. Please think it over. Without you, I really can't do anything. Look at me, I can't walk or even stand. Don't just leave a guy like this alone. John's tone is earnest. He knows if he loses me now, he's finished. It was clear to me that he was desperate to keep me tied to him here, to not let me go. But still, I'm sorry, I just can't continue with you anymore, so please give up. With that, I stand up to leave. Sean looks at me and pleads, "Wait, let's talk," but I leave the hospital room without listening to his cries. Soon after, my divorce from John was finalized. A mutual acquaintance of John and me just happened to know about John's affair, and when they heard about John's accident, they testified in court, which swung things even more in my favor. John begged me not to leave him, crying until the end, but my disgust for him had grown so strong that I couldn't stand the sight of him and didn't take any of his words to heart. I received a fair amount in alimony, though it wasn't a fortune. Unfortunately, John had to leave his job due to the accident. Now he's working at a company that hires people with disabilities, doing simpler tasks. Consequently, his salary has decreased. He's finding it tough to cover expenses with the alimony payments and can't afford a comfortable life. John's parents cut ties with him when they found out about the affair, showing no concern for his condition. They expect him to fend for himself from now on. As for me, I'm leading a fairly content life. Since divorcing John, my brother and his wife, concerned about my newfound single status, often bring over Emily, which keeps me from feeling lonely. "Auntie, let's play. Let's play." Emily's words were a wake-up call for me. That's why I'm so thankful to her. As an aunt, I aim to continue being a dependable presence for her.
The moment Elaine, my mother-in-law, walked into the Thanksgiving dinner, her eyes scanning the room like she owned it, I knew trouble was brewing. "How's your mom doing?" she asked, her voice dripping with a feigned concern that couldn't mask the jealousy lurking beneath. As she eagerly suggested a trip to the mountains, blatantly ignoring the gravity of my mother's illness, I realized that this wasn't just about her wanting time with us. It was a twisted game of one-upmanship where her need for attention clashed with our somber reality. Life before September was a quiet stream, flowing undisturbed. My husband Jake and I had carved out a modest life in our bustling city, far from our hometowns. We were content, or so we thought, until the day my phone rang with news that turned our world upside down. "Mom's sick," my brother's voice trembled on the other end. "It's breast cancer, and it's bad." The words hit me like a physical blow. Mom, the invincible matriarch of our family, the woman who had weathered every storm, was now facing her toughest battle. Metastatic breast cancer. The words echoed in my mind, a relentless reminder of the fragility of life. Jake held me that night, as I cried, his arms a stronghold against the chaos unraveling within me. We knew what we had to do. Within weeks, we arranged to work remotely and packed our lives into suitcases, ready to move across the country to be with Mom. Our plan was met with mixed reactions. My in-laws, particularly my mother-in-law, Elaine, were initially overjoyed at the prospect of us moving back. She lived just an hour and a half from my parents, a proximity that seemed convenient but soon proved to be anything but. "Can't wait to have you both nearby." Elaine's voice chirped over the phone, a stark contrast to the somber mood that had enveloped our lives. I appreciated her enthusiasm, or at least I tried to. But as our departure date neared, her excitement morphed into a relentless expectation for our time and attention. It was as if she couldn't see beyond her own desires, blind to the grim reality we were facing. "We should plan a trip to the mountains," she suggested during one of our calls, her tone oblivious to the weight of our situation. I exchanged a weary look with Jake. How could we explain to her that our move wasn't a joyous reunion, but a somber duty to be with my ailing mother? We arrived at my childhood home in November, welcomed by the familiar sights and scents, now tinged with the underlying scent of medication and antiseptic. Mom, once vibrant and full of life, was a shadow of her former self, the cancer stealing away her strength, but not her spirit. Elaine's calls became more frequent, each one a subtle reminder of her expectations. Thanksgiving was approaching, and she had made it clear she expected us to join her. It was a delicate balance, trying to cater to her needs without neglecting my mother. The Thanksgiving dinner was a surreal experience. Elaine, dressed in her festive best, chatted animatedly, occasionally throwing glances at my mother, who sat quietly, conserving her energy. I could feel the tension in the air by an unspoken battle of needs and desires. "How's your mom doing?" Elaine asked, her voice tinged with a curiosity that felt more invasive than empathetic. She's fighting, I replied, forcing a smile. We're just taking it one day at a time. That's the spirit, Elaine said, but her eyes quickly shifted to Jake. We should definitely plan that mountain trip soon, for some fresh air. I bit back a retort, the words "not now" sitting heavily on my tongue. This was not the time for leisure plans, not when every moment with my mother was precious. That night, as Jake and I lay in my old bedroom, the weight of our situation settled heavily on us. We were caught in a tug-of-war between duty and obligation, each pull threatening to tear us apart. Your mom doesn't get it, Jake whispered, his voice heavy with fatigue. It's like she's living in a different world. I nodded, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were here for my mother, to support her in her fight against an unrelenting enemy. But in doing so, we had inadvertently ignited another battle, one with an adversary we hadn't anticipated, Elaine's jealousy and unmet expectations. The Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house with Elaine present was a balancing act on a tightrope. While Mom rested in her chair, conserving her energy, Elaine's presence filled the room like an overzealous perfume. Her laughter was a bit too loud, her stories a bit too long. Jake and I exchanged knowing glances, each trying to mediate the unspoken tension. Elaine's eyes often darted towards my mother, her gaze a mix of curiosity and something I couldn't quite place. Was it envy? Pity? I couldn't tell. Mom, for her part, offered polite smiles, a testament to her enduring grace even in the face of her illness. The real test came when Elaine suggested a post-dinner walk. A little stroll will do us good, she announced, her voice tinged with an enthusiasm that felt out of place. I hesitated, glancing at Mom. I think we'll stay in, I said gently. Mom needs to rest. Elaine's smile faltered for a moment, a flash of disappointment crossing her features before she masked it with a nod. Of course, dear. Another time, then. As she left with Jake's sister, I couldn't shake off the feeling of guilt. It gnawed at me, the thought that maybe I was being too harsh, too unyielding. But then I looked at Mom. Her face etched with the quiet battle she fought every day, and I knew my loyalty lay with her. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and quiet evenings at home. Mom's strength ebbed and flowed like the tides, some days bright and talkative, others withdrawn and weary. Through it all, Jake and I were her steadfast anchors, holding on amidst the storm. Meanwhile, Elaine's calls became a constant undercurrent in our lives. "When are you coming to visit?" she would ask, her voice laced with a hint of reproach. "I miss you both so much." Jake handled these conversations with a patience I admired. "We're really tied up with Mom's treatments," he'd explain, his tone apologetic yet firm, "but we'll try to make it soon." Each call ended with promises left hanging like unfinished sentences, and I could sense Jake's frustration growing. It was a tug-of-war between his mother's wants and his own sense of duty towards mine. As Christmas neared, the air grew colder, and so did the atmosphere between us and Elaine. She invited us to her annual family Christmas party, a lavish affair that was the highlight of her social calendar. But the thought of a crowded house, with laughter and merriment, felt jarringly out of sync with our current reality. "We can't," I told Jake, my decision firm. "It's too risky for Mom, and honestly, for me too." Jake agreed, but the task of conveying this to Elaine fell heavily on his shoulders. I could only imagine how she would take this news, another rejection, another preference for my family over hers. But our priority was clear, and it wasn't the festive allure of a Christmas party. It was the quiet, somber room where my mother lay, fighting a battle that overshadowed all else. The decision not to attend Elaine's Christmas party was met with a strained understanding on her part, but the underlying disappointment was palpable. "I understand, dear," she said over the phone, her voice a mixture of resignation and thinly veiled frustration, "but you'll be missing a lovely evening." Jake's response was gentle but unwavering. "Mom's health comes first, you know that." I listened from the other side of the room, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The situation was delicate, a fragile truce at best, and I feared any wrong word might shatter it. The days leading up to Christmas were a study in contrasts. While Elaine prepared for her festive gathering, our home was enveloped in a quiet routine of caregiving and support for my mother. The joy of the season seemed a distant echo, muffled by the more pressing concerns of health and survival. Elaine's occasional updates about the party preparations felt like intrusions from another world. "We'll have a lovely tree and the children will put on a little play," she enthused during one call. "That sounds nice," I replied, forcing a smile into my voice. But my mind was elsewhere, on the pale figure resting in the next room, her life hanging in a delicate balance. The day of the party arrived, and with it came a flurry of messages and photos from Elaine, showcasing the festive atmosphere at her home. Each image was a splash of color and light, a stark contrast to the somber tones of our current life. "I wish you could be here," Elaine texted, a note of longing in her words. Jake sighed as he read the message. "I know she's trying to include us, but it just makes it harder." I nodded, understanding his conflict. It was a no-win situation. Staying here was an unspoken acknowledgement of our priorities, but it also meant widening the gap between us and Elaine. As evening fell, the sounds of laughter and music from Elaine's party reached us through phone calls and messages. It was as if the merriment from there underscored the silence in our home. "I feel like I'm letting her down," Jake admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "You're doing what's right," I reassured him, although I grappled with my own doubts. Were we being unfair to Elaine? But then I looked at my mother, her face serene yet etched with the lines of her struggle, and I knew we had made the only choice we could. That night, as we sat in the quiet living room, the glow of the Christmas lights seemed dimmer, the festive spirit subdued. Our hearts were with Mom, in this battle that allowed no room for distractions, no matter how well-intentioned they might be. Elaine's world of celebrations and gatherings seemed a universe away, and for now, that was a distance we had to maintain. The aftermath of the Christmas party left a subtle shift in Elaine's attitude towards us. Her calls, once filled with exuberant chatter, now carried a note of coolness, a hint of reproach that lingered like a shadow. The emotional distance was growing, a chasm widened by unspoken grievances and misunderstood intentions. Jake and I found ourselves discussing Elaine more often, trying to navigate this delicate terrain. "She just doesn't see the whole picture," Jake would say, his brow furrowed in frustration. It's like she's only thinking about herself." I couldn't help but agree, though a part of me empathized with Elaine's loneliness. It was a confusing tangle of emotions, understanding her need for attention, yet resenting the pressure it put on us. As New Year approached, the tension reached a new height. Elaine called, her voice brittle with contained emotion. "I feel like you're avoiding me," she accused, her words sharp and direct. Jake's response was calm, but I could hear the strain in his voice. "Mom, it's not about avoiding you. We're just really focused on Nerder's mother's name right now." Elaine's reply was a mixture of hurt and anger. "You don't think I understand? I'm a mother too, you know, but you're treating me as if I'm not part of this family." The conversation spiraled into an uncomfortable confrontation, with Elaine expressing her feelings of being sidelined and neglected. Her words were laced with a bitterness that took us by surprise. "You're always there for her, but what about me? Don't I matter?" The call ended on a tense note, leaving an uneasy silence in its wake. I looked at Jake, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. The situation was more complex than we had realized. It wasn't just about Elaine's demands for attention. It was about her feeling of loss, of not being a priority in her son's life anymore. We sat in silence, the weight of the situation settling heavily upon us. It was clear that this was more than just a case of competing demands. It was a deep-seated feeling of jealousy that Elaine harbored, a jealousy that was now openly affecting our relationship. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger towards Elaine. How could she be so self-centered, so blind to what we were going through? But then, in the quiet of the night, a thought struck me. Perhaps Elaine's jealousy was rooted in fear, a fear of losing her place in her son's life, a fear exacerbated by the crisis we were facing. It was a bitter pill to swallow, recognizing that beneath the surface of Elaine's demands and complaints lay a deeper issue, one that needed addressing. But the question remained, how could we bridge this growing gap? How could we heal the wounds that were slowly tearing our family apart? The days that followed were a dance around unspoken words and unaddressed feelings. Jake and I knew that the situation with Elaine couldn't be left to fester, yet the courage to confront it head-on was hard to muster. Each of Elaine's calls now felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing between reassurance and honesty, trying not to fall into an abyss of conflict. Finally, one chilly evening, Jake decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "We need to talk to her, face to face," he said, determination lacing his voice. "This can't go on like this." I agreed, albeit with a sense of trepidation. The thought of confronting Elaine, of laying bare all the hurt and misunderstandings, was daunting. Yet the need for resolution, for some semblance of peace, was greater. We arranged to meet Elaine at a small cafe, a neutral ground away from the emotional landscapes of our homes. The meeting was tense from the outset. Elaine's smile was tight, her eyes guarded. We exchanged pleasantries, but they were just brittle veneers over the turmoil underneath. Jake took the lead. "Mom, we need to talk about what's been going on," he began, his voice steady but gentle. Elaine's facade wavered, her eyes flashing a mix of defensiveness and hurt. "So now you have time for me?" she retorted, the bitterness evident. "We've always had time for you," I interjected, trying to keep my voice even. "But Mom's illness, it's been consuming us." Elaine shook her head, a sigh escaping her. "I understand that she's sick, but what about me? Don't I count for anything?" The conversation unfolded, a raw and honest dialogue that peeled back layers of hurt, assumptions, and unspoken fears. Elaine spoke of feeling abandoned, of fearing that she had lost her place in Jake's life. Jake expressed his struggle to balance his duties, his guilt over not being able to meet everyone's expectations. There were tears, moments of heated words, but also instances of quiet understanding. It was a cathartic release, an airing of grievances that had long been suppressed. "I just feel so alone," Elaine confessed, her voice cracking with emotion. "Ever since you moved, I feel like I've been losing you." Jake reached across the table, taking his mother's hand. "You're not losing me, Mom, but we have to face what's in front of us right now. Nair's mother's name needs us." As the conversation drew to a close, there was a sense of relief, a lightening of the load we had all been carrying. It wasn't a magical resolution. The issues were too complex for quick fixes. But it was a start, a step towards understanding and healing. We left the cafe with a tentative plan to stay more connected, to include Elaine in our lives in ways that were manageable given our current circumstances. It was a compromise, an acknowledgement of each other's needs and limitations. That night, as I sat beside my mother, holding her frail hand in mine, I felt a sense of peace. The confrontation with Elaine had been difficult, but it had opened a door to empathy and understanding, a path to navigate this challenging journey with a little more grace and a little less burden. In the weeks that followed our meeting with Elaine, a subtle change began to weave through our interactions. The air of tension that once hung between us started to dissipate, replaced by a cautious but growing understanding. We kept Elaine more involved through regular phone calls and occasional visits, ensuring she felt included and valued. Elaine, for her part, seemed to make an effort to understand the gravity of our situation. She started asking more about my mother's health, her voice carrying genuine concern. It was a small but significant shift, indicating a willingness to see beyond her own needs. Jake and I also worked on balancing our time and energy. We realized that while my mother's illness demanded much of us, it was important not to neglect other relationships, especially with Elaine. It was a delicate balancing act, but one we were now more equipped to handle with empathy and understanding. As spring approached, bringing with it a sense of renewal, so too did our family dynamics begin to find a new equilibrium. My mother's health showed small but encouraging signs of improvement, and with it, our spirits lifted. The heavy burden of the past months started to ease, allowing us to breathe a little more freely. Elaine's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable. The jealousy and bitterness that had once clouded her interactions with us slowly faded, revealing a more compassionate and understanding side of her. She even started joining us for quiet afternoons with my mother, bringing with her an air of warmth and positivity. One such afternoon, as we sat in the garden, Elaine reached out to my mother, taking her hand gently. "I'm here for you too," she said softly. The moment was simple yet profound, marking a new chapter in our relationship. Jake and I watched this exchange, a sense of relief and gratitude washing over us. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had brought us to a place of greater understanding and compassion. As the story of our family unfolded, I realized the power of open communication and empathy. Our confrontation with Elaine had opened a door to healing, not just for our strained relationships, but also within ourselves. It taught us the importance of facing difficulties head-on, of acknowledging and addressing the emotions that drive us. The final chapter of this journey was yet to be written, but as I looked at my family, united in our garden, I felt hopeful. We had navigated the stormy waters of jealousy, illness, and misunderstanding, and had found a way to emerge stronger and more connected. Life, I understood, was a tapestry of complex emotions and experiences. But with love, patience, and a willingness to understand each other's perspectives, we could weave a story of resilience and togetherness. And in that story, we found our strength and our peace.